Hello my dear amazing learners, welcome back to Freehead. So today we will continue with the lesson Living World, and basically what we will look at today is what basically is living, what are the defining features for the characteristic property, what are the difference between them, why we use two different terminologies, and at the end of this lecture you will get to know the complete outlay of how we differentiate a living thing or living organism from a non-living organism. Okay, so let's get into the lesson today. What is living? When we try to define living, we conventionally look for distinctive characteristics. What is distinctive? Unique or special? So we look for special characteristics exhibited by living organism. Obviously, it should not be present in non-living organism. Growth, reproduction, ability to sense the environment. What does it mean? Ability to understand what is happening in the environment, whether the temperature is rising or the temperature is falling down. You are going to understand what is basically happening in the environment around you and mount a suitable response, and based on what is happening around you, you mount a response or you demonstrate or you put up a response, and that is being shown here. Come to our mind immediately as unique features of living organism. Of course, yes, only living organism do reproduce, grow, and they can sense the environment. So that is the basic concept, the basic idea that we have. One can add a few more features like metabolism. What is metabolism? The complete chemical reaction that happens within our body, complete chemical reactions. So be it building or breaking down. So both of these comes under metabolism. An ability to self-replicate. What is self-replicate? Produce a copy that looks like us. A human produces another human, an elephant reproduces an elephant, a cat produces a cat. So they are able to replicate offsprings of their own kind. Self-organize. The complete body plan that we have, location of eyes, heart, lungs, gut and everything, we are self-organized. We didn't plan that our eyes should be here, but it was self-organized because it is coded in our cells, in our DNA. So self-organized is one of the property of living organism. Interact. So interact is again something like sensing the environment. You understand what is happening around you, what is happening in the environment. You interact. And emergence. So you respond, you demonstrate a response. Okay, so all these are unique property of living organism. Let us try to understand each of these. Now the first property that we will be discussing is all living organisms grow. Okay, every living organism without an exception grow. So in growth, it is very important what are the terminologies that you are going to use. If you say growth in height, then animals' growth is defined or it is fixed only to a certain age. After that we cannot grow. But in case of plants they can grow. So you should be very careful by defining what growth is, and then you can tag it to living organisms. So increase in mass. Here what we are defining, increase in mass, okay, increase in weight and increase in number. When the number of organisms also increase, when the number increase, cell number, or when the mass increase, we can call it as growth in living organism. So these two are twin characteristics of growth. So when I say growth, you should remember two words. What is that? Increase in mass and increase in number. Number of cells increase and mass increase, both comes to under growth. A multicellular organism grows by cell division. So what does multicellular organism do? They grow by cell division. In plants, this growth by cell division occurs continuously throughout their lifespan. So if you take for example plants, cell division and associated or following up growth takes completely during their life cycle. It does not stop anywhere. The plant keeps on growing and growing. But in case of animals, the growth is seen up to a certain age. Okay, so does that mean cell division stops? In case of plant, what we told, cell division takes place and associated growth also takes place throughout the life cycle. In animals, what are we saying? Cell growth, not cell growth, the organism's growth stops after a particular age. Does that mean cell division also stops? No. Only the growth or increase in height of the animals or increase in size may be stopped, but cell division continues to occur. Let me take a very simple example. For example, you get an injury in the hand. What happens? The damaged tissue has to be replaced. How do cells get replaced? Cell division occurs. By means of cell division, the old cells, they shed off and new cells are formed and they seal the wound. Okay. So, meaning very simple, that though growth by height stops, cell division continues to occur in the animals. Cell division occurs in certain tissues to replace lost cells, just like the example I told you. The unicellular organism grow by cell divisions. So, unicellular organism, the number of cells, we told growth has two criteria, maybe increase in mass or increase in number. And how do unicellular organisms grow? By increase in cell number. One can easily observe this in vitro cultures. What is in vitro? In vitro is something that happens outside the body, okay, in glass vials or in test tubes. We call it in vitro cultures. You can easily observe them in vitro cultures by simply counting the number of cells under the microscope. So, let me say, for example, you take a petri dish, okay, you add, so you have like this, at the end of maybe say 24 hours, you can find more and more bacteria being added up, okay. So, when you count this, number of colonies have increased or number of organism has increased by cell division. So, this is what basically we are trying to explain here. In majority of higher plants and animals, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive, meaning independent, okay. Growth is something else, reproduction is something else. For example, let me zoom out a single bacteria. You have a bacteria like this, and now by means of cell division, this bacteria gives up two bacteria has been created. Bacteria is not a word, bacterium and bacteria we call them, and we have two bacteria here. Now, when you think about growth, increase in number is also growth. So, it means this bacteria has grown, point 1. Point 2, reproduction. The bacteria has produced another bacteria of its own kind. So, reproduction is also taking place. But in case of plant, okay, but in case of plant, let me take a very simple example. So, I have a plant like this and then it eventually becomes a tree. So, this is growth, and then it produces a fruit, it produces a seed, and this seed produces a plantlet. This is reproduction. Okay. For bacteria, this is growth as well as reproduction, but for plant, this is growth and this is reproduction. So, that is very different. Okay. You can say here we see both growth and reproduction. Here you can see growth, reproduction. Okay. So, growth and reproduction are mutually exclusive. They are very different here, but in case of unicellular, they are mutually inclusive. One must remember that increase in body mass is considered as growth. If you take increase in body mass as a growth criteria, non-living objects also grow. How? How do non-living objects grow? Mountains, so you have very big mountains, boulders are kind of smaller mountain, and sand mounds. When you consider mountains and boulders, you can see rocks. In case of sand mounds, the mountain or the small mound is made up of sand. They also grow. How do they grow? By accumulation of material. What happens? Materials get deposited on the top of the mountain or the boulder or the sand mounds, and their weight increases. We have kept the criteria of growth as increase in mass. So, mountain's mass increases, so therefore mountain grows. That is what they are trying to say. Okay. So, non-living objects also grow. In living organism, if you see, growth is from inside. Our growth is from internal growth. But in case of mountains, it is the external deposition. So, this is kind of external growth, and for us growth is from inside. Growth therefore cannot be taken as a defining property. I will come to this terminology. It is not a defining property. condition under which it can be observed in all living organisms have to be explained. Okay. So, without an exception, every living organism has to exhibit the growth, and you have to set the defining property as such, defining character. For example, we have fixed growth as increase in mass and increase in number. So, if we keep increase in mass as a criteria, then what happens? Even non-living organism grows. Okay. So, you have to fine tune how do you define growth. Okay. As for now, growth is not a defining property based on the observation or based on the assumption we kept before. Then we understand that it is a characteristic of living system. So, it is not a defining property, but it is a characteristic of living system, and of course, yeah, dead organism do not grow. So, you cannot observe growth in the dead organism. Okay. Now, let me explain you what is defining property and characteristic feature. Defining property, this is so if you say defining property, it is a must. So, definitely this must be seen in order for that component to be called living. But in case of characteristic feature, it is like may or like may not be. It may be present or it may not be also present, it is not a very big difference. So, when I say defining property, 100% sure it has to be present in that thing to be called as living. When I say characteristic feature, it may or may not be present and it makes no harm. Okay. So, you should understand the difference between these two components, because we will be studying around 6 properties and just a minute. So, we will be studying around 6 properties and all these whirls around these two concepts, because the entire idea behind what is living is to classify living and differentiate non-living from it. So, you should have a very good clarity between these two terminologies. If it is defining property, 100% sure it must be there. For the characteristic feature, it is not, it may or may not be. So, I hope you got that point. So, now we will move to the next concept. Reproduction is the second point. So, reproduction likewise is a characteristic of living organism. So, before getting into that concept itself, they are telling us reproduction is a characteristic. Why? In multicellular organism, reproduction refers to the production of progeny possessing features more or less similar to the parents. So, when I say reproduction, a human being reproduces another human being, so it must be similar to its parent. Similar to its parent, at least the morphological similarities or the morphological structure of the progeny and the parent must be similar. That is what we are trying here. Invariably and implicitly, here what are we trying to explain is the sexual reproduction. But of course, organism also reproduces by asexual reproduction. So, here we will just put a column like this. I will go with organism. So, I have organism here, and here we will give mode of reproduction. So, you can also write these kind of column on side of the space, in the side space that is given in the book. So, just you can have a very quick recap of what we studied here in the para in a very small form. It will save time. So, first thing will be fungi. So, how do fungi reproduce? Fungi reproduce by asexual spore. Okay. So, how do fungi reproduce? Fungi reproduces by asexual spores. Next, yeast and hydra. How do yeast and hydra reproduce? By means of budding. Okay. Next, what is the third one? It is planaria. Planaria reproduces by regeneration. What is regeneration? Let me draw it for you. So, let us imagine this is planaria. I am chopping it off into 3 pieces, and 3 piece regenerates its lost part. For example, this head portion has lost its middle and bottom portion. It will regenerate both, and this middle portion will replace its head and bottom portion, and the final one which has that body portion reproduces head and this. So, one planaria has become 3. This is known as true regeneration. Okay, that is known as true regeneration. And finally, you can see fungi, algae, then protonema of masses, only the protonema, don't take other forms. It can also reproduce by fragmentation. So, this is important. The type of asexual, remember these are all asexual, meaning it involves only one parent. This is very, very important. Have that in mind. So, asexual reproduction involves only one parent. Okay. So, now we will just get into the para. Fungi multiply and spread easily due to millions of asexual spores they produce. So, they can spread by asexual spore. In lower organism like yeast and hydra, what happens? By budding they reproduces. In planaria, commonly called flatworms, what we observe? True regeneration. Okay, the fragmented part regenerates into the entire organism. A fragmented organism regenerates the lost part of its body and becomes a new organism. Then fungi, filamentous alga, protonema of masses, all easily reproduces by fragmentation. When it comes to unicellular organism, okay, so this is something unique. When I say it comes to unicellular organism, like bacteria, amoeba, reproduction is synonymous with growth. Synonymous means what? They are like means the same. Why does it means the same? You have learned before. I am taking one bacteria, it reproduces, it produces another bacteria. Okay, one bacteria produces another bacteria. Now we can say this bacteria has reproduced. But can I also say that it has grown? It has exhibited growth because it has increased in number, right? Because the property that we set for reproduction, growth is just 2, either increase in mass or increase in number or both. So, here what happens? The bacteria divides and produces 2 bacteria. So, we can say it reproduces, or else I can also say the number of bacteria has increased. So, what I am telling you? It has grown or it has exhibited growth. So, we can use these 2 terms synonymously, that is increase in number of cells. We have already defined the growth as equivalent to increase in cell number or mass. Hence, we notice that in single celled organism, we are not very clear about the usage of these 2 terms. So, like growth and reproduction, it is always quite confusion rising, which terminology to use is quite confusing. Further, there are many organisms which do not reproduce, though they are living, they do not reproduce. What is a mule? Mule is a cross between donkey and horse, so they do not reproduce. Sterile worker bees, they do not reproduce. And finally, infertile human couples. So, some couples, because of the physiological condition or some other problem, they could not reproduce. So, there are some living organisms also which cannot reproduce. So, reproduction cannot be taken as a defining property, because defining property is like 100%. Even if single thing moves up, then there is no point of talking about it. Hence, reproduction also cannot be an all inclusive defining characteristic of living organism. Otherwise, no non-living organism, of course, non-living organism is capable of reproduction or replicating by itself. Though non-living objects cannot reproduce, there are still some of the living organism with the exception of reproduction. So, we cannot say reproduction is a defining property, but we can say reproduction is a characteristic feature. Okay? I hope you are getting my point. Now, next characteristic is metabolism. Another characteristic of life is metabolism. All living organisms are made of chemicals. So, basically what I mean by chemicals? Chemical components made up of like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. These elements make up chemicals. Even our body is made up of chemicals. These chemicals, small and big, belonging to various classes. So, basically what are they trying to say when they use classes? Classes is carbohydrates, proteins, fats. So there are like different classes of chemicals. When I say sizes, in carbohydrate we have monosaccharides, disaccharides, polysaccharides based on their size, based on the number of carbon present, and functions. So like monosaccharide like glucose, they provide energy. Polysaccharides like starch are used for storage. So functions also different. Storage. Glucose is like for maybe say energy source. Are constantly being made and changed into some other biomolecule. So what happens is there is a constant cycle. Glucose is converted into starch when there is excess of glucose, and starch is broken down into glucose when there is a need. So they are constantly being made into something else. There are thousands of metabolic reactions occurring simultaneously. Even the minute I am speaking with you, there are a lot of metabolic reactions happening at a rate that you cannot imagine. Okay? So the thousands of metabolic reactions occurring simultaneously inside all living organism, be they unicellular. So it doesn't matter whether what we are discussing about is a unicellular or multicellular, and in every organism the metabolism takes place. So all plants, animals, fungi and microbe exhibit metabolism. Everybody exhibits metabolism. The sum total of all the chemical reactions. So all the chemical reaction basically deals with building and breaking up. So building up and breaking down. No non-living object exhibits metabolism. There is not a non-living object which exhibits metabolism. Metabolic reaction can be demonstrated outside the body in cell-free system. So what happens? You can take all the substrate, you can take a test tube, you can add substrate, okay, then you can add enzymes and then incubate. You get the products. Okay, so you take test tube, you add substrate, enzyme, incubate, you get the products. So an isolated metabolic reaction outside the body of an organism performed in a test tube. So the same reaction happens in your body also. So can you say that this is living? You cannot say. So what is the conclusion we are drawing them is they are living reactions but not living organism. They are definitely living reactions, but they are not living organism. It is neither living nor non-living. Hence, while metabolism is defining feature of all living organism without an exception, isolated metabolic reaction in vitro are not living things but surely living reactions. So isolated metabolic reactions in vitro. Okay, so isolated metabolic reactions in vitro are not living things. So they don't live, but they are surely living reactions. And cellular organization is of the body is the defining feature. So no non-living thing is made up of cells. Only the living organism has cells. So cellular organization is a defining feature, and metabolism is also defining feature. Okay. Next, we come to an important portion. Perhaps the most obvious and technically complicated feature of all living organisms is the ability to sense their surrounding and environment and respond to these environmental stimuli. So this is a very unique property of animals and plants. They are able to sense what happens in the external world, and they are able to give a response, a suitable response to it, and it is interesting also, and it is complicated. So respond to these environmental stimuli, which could be physical. What do you mean by when it is physical? It may be like water droplets falling on our skin during rain, or maybe an electric shock. These are physical. When I say chemical, maybe addition of an acid or addition of some different component to our skin, or even by means of taste. So these are chemical stimuli. Biological stimuli, maybe the hormones, Okay, any stimuli. So it can be physical, chemical, biological, any kind of stimuli. We sense our environment through our sense organs. So like we have said that we have 5 sense organs, like vision, like eyes, nose, ears, then you can say taste, then touch. So these kind of different sense organ, and we understand, we collect information from the external world to these 5 sense organs. Plant respond to external factors. So you can see some of the factors, some of the leaves aligning themselves with the sunlight, so they get maximum sunlight by means of chloroplast alignment, or sometimes the flower head turns or the leaf turns where the sunlight is present. Then with poor availability of water, the plant dries and dies. Temperature, when the temperature is too high, it closes, it shuts down its stomata, and same happen with pollutants. When the pollutant concentration is high, it shuts down the stomata. And when it comes of other organism, when it thinks it is being attacked by a predator, it sends chemicals, messenger signals. Some poisonous chemical is produced within the plant to alert, and sometimes it also send components to other plants to alert them. So if these are components by which these are the types or ways by which plant understand what is going on in the environment, and they respond accordingly. All organisms from prokaryote to the most complex eukaryote can sense. So they can basically sense and respond to environmental cues. So they are able to understand and mount a response. What is photoperiod? It is the required length of dark and light period. So when I say dark, it is like night time, light is daytime. So some plants require specific day length and night length in order to flower. The same thing applies to animals as well. This can be seen in seasonal breeders. So like some animals breed only during the specific season, they don't breed in other seasons. So those are called seasonal breeders. So this photoperiod will affect reproduction in seasonal breeders, both in case of plants as well as in animal. A very important line. All organisms handle chemicals entering their bodies, maybe by means of food or by means of other parts. All organisms therefore are aware of their surrounding. When I say living organism, of course they are aware of the surrounding. Human being is the only organism, they are the only organism who is aware of himself, has self-consciousness. So you should understand what is the difference between consciousness and self-consciousness. When I say conscious, it is receiving information by 5 senses which we have and responding. When I say self-conscious, it is about it is about unique to humans. Okay, so consciousness is 5th sense, 5 senses. Self-consciousness is the 6th sense, it is unique to humans. So consciousness is a defining property, but self-consciousness is not a defining property. Okay, then when it comes to humans, it is all the more difficult to define the living state. We observe patients lying in coma. So when you look at patient in coma, they will not be giving any response to external stimuli. They will not move their hand even if you pick it. It will stay as such in the place. Does that mean they are non-living? Obviously no, they are living. There are some exceptional cases which makes them living. So just because they don't respond, it doesn't make them they are non-living. Okay. Then virtually supported by machines which replace heart and lungs. The patient is otherwise brain dead, but still you cannot count them as non-living. The patient has no self-consciousness. So we told consciousness is not a defining property, but consciousness is. So you don't qualify this as non-living. Or such patients who never come back to normal life, living or non-living. So what is your perspective? So from my perspective, I will say definitely they are living. So they are, it's like just because they don't respond, it doesn't mean they are non-living. Okay, so they may be understanding them, but they may not be able to elicit a immune response because of poor connection. But once they were able to do that, right? So, and they also have the possibility of doing that in the future also. Okay, with the help of medical aid and something, they can definitely do it in future. So what we try to say is they are still living. Okay. In higher classes, you will come to know that all living phenomena are due to underlying interactions. So, now we are going to discuss about an important component, interactions. Properties of tissues are not present in the constituent cells, but arise as a result of interactions. So, imagine a lot of tissues piling up like this. When you see cells like this, it is not because of only the cellular arrangement, but also the interaction between the cells. That is the reason for the property of the tissue. Okay? And similarly, when you imagine an organelle, it is not just because of the molecular component that the organelle gains the unique property, but also the interaction between the molecular components that confers the unique property of the cell organelle. Okay? So, interactions are important. When you talk about tissue, interaction of cell is important. When you talk of organelle, interaction of molecules is important. Similarly, properties of cell organelles are not present in the molecular constituents of the organelle, but arise as a result of interaction among the molecular components comprising the organelle. These interactions result in emergent properties at a higher level of organization. So, here when you see cell is a lower level and then tissue is a higher level. So, interaction of cells gives unique property to tissue. Interaction of tissue gives unique property to organ. Okay? So, interaction at the lower level characterizes the higher level. This phenomenon is true in the hierarchy of organizational complexity at all levels. So, even if you go up and up, it remains that. Therefore, we can say that living organisms are self-replicating, they are able to reproduce and produce offsprings of their own kind, evolving by means of sexual reproduction. Small changes get accumulated in each generation, and after a larger time scale, you can see a new species evolving from another species. And they are self-regulating, they are able to maintain the internal body temperature organisms, or they may be able to maintain some of the factors on their own. One good example is homeostasis in humans, where we regulate the internal body temperature irrespective of the external environmental temperature. Capable of responding to external stimuli, they are able to respond to external stimuli. So, simply biology is the story of life on earth, biology is the story of evolution of living organisms on earth. So, all living organisms which is present in the past or future are linked to one another by means of genetic material, the common genetic material, but to varying degrees. Maybe one organism may be related to another with a very large amount of similarity, and the other may be related only by very small amount of similarity. All these things are possible. Okay? So, basically what we are trying to convey here is that there are 6 points that you should be remembering. First, growth. When you say growth, growth is not a defining property. Why? Because non-living organisms also grow. When you consider increase in mass as one of the criteria. So, according to growth, we have increase in mass as well as increase in number. When increase in mass is constant, non-living organisms also grow. So, growth is not a defining property. Second, you come to reproduction. When I say reproduction, there are still some exceptions. So, reproduction cannot be taken as a defining feature. Third one is metabolism. When we talk of metabolism, there are two things. So, only non-living organisms cannot give any metabolism, but living organisms gives or exhibits metabolism. Okay? You can also isolate the reactions and make it happen in a test tube. When you make it happen in a test tube, what do? When you make it happen in a test tube, they are living reactions but not living organism. So, of course, metabolism is also a defining feature. Then fourth, what do you say? Cellular organization. Cellular organization. So, you can observe cellular organization, cell, tissues, all those things can be seen only in case of living organism and not in non-living organism. Then fifth one, what do you say? Conscious. Okay, when I say conscious, we talk about 5 senses. All organisms, like 5 senses means it does not mean everything should have 5 senses. Ability to understand what is happening in the environment in one way or the other and they able to respond. So, that is conscious, and next thing is self-conscious. Only in case of humans. No other organism is capable of understanding themselves. So, we call them non-self-conscious. Okay. So, now if you write what is like defining property, it is very important. Growth is a defining growth is not a defining property, it is a characteristic feature. Reproduction is a characteristic feature. Metabolism is a defining feature or defining property. Cell organization is a defining feature. Consciousness is not a defining feature, it is a characteristic, it is a defining feature. Then human self-consciousness, it is a characteristic feature. So, let me give you an overlay again. Growth is a characteristic feature because it has exception, reproduction has exception, so it is a characteristic feature. Metabolism is a defining feature, cell organization defining feature. Consciousness is again a defining feature, and self-consciousness is a characteristic feature because it may or may not be present, does not make much difference. So, till now we have seen what is living, we have answered a very important question and we have covered a very important portion of the lesson, living world. Hope you understand what I taught you in today's class. So, leave up a thumbs up sign in the comment section if you are able to follow up what I am teaching you, and keep practicing everything. Thank you for watching and happy learning.